which were not there earlier means, the extent and the degree of disclosure which was there was missing. So these basic tenets of our, the reforms which were introduced at that time, they've continued even till date. And of course, several refinements have been brought about, which is obvious. With experience you learn and you make further reforms. Another important area was participation by retail investors in public issues, which was encouraged with a reservation at that time of a minimum of 50% of the net offer to the retail individual investors. And now here I like to bring in Dr. L.C. Gupta. I very clearly remember, he used to believe that it is important to democratize our markets and bring about widespread ownership of shares of the listed companies. So, we would always argue that mutual fund is the starting point for investors. Investors should enter the market through mutual funds and they should not enter into secondary market because it could be risky and so on. So he had a slightly different view, if I can say. He used to say that, fine, mutual funds are definitely a great start, but at the same time, we should encourage our investors to enter the market through IPOs. And his thinking was that if you get even a small quantity of share, even if you become an owner of, let's say, 10 shares in a company, you get a direct experience of how the securities markets work. In the sense, if you become a shareholder, you will be entitled to receive annual report. You will be entitled to vote on the resolutions which are brought about in the AGMs. You are entitled to attend those AGMs. You are entitled for dividends and so on. So he says all this is important for developing the equity culture. What is equity culture? Equity culture is when your ordinary population starts participating, and participating not just for investment and getting a return, but also, participating in the governance issues, in the, understanding financials and so on. So that he had a much wider vision on the equity culture, and he always maintained this, that the retail our markets are not like West. We need to encourage, it's a huge population we have and very few people invest in the markets. Everybody is doing only deposits, bank deposits. So if you want to move them, you should encourage some special treatment, some special reservation for retail investors. And that's how this reform was brought about. And today also we have 35% reservation for retail individual investors in our IPOs. The philosophy has remained the same. So that is one important part I wanted to highlight. As regards secondary securities market, where day-to-day trading happens. So he was a member of the high-powered group which was headed by Shri Pherwani at that point of time, and which led to their recommendations led to the setting up of a national stock exchange. And NSE brought in, they heralded the era of screen-based trading, and that was a huge game changer. So he was a part of that committee. Further, the Securities Contract Regulation Act was amended to allow issuances and trading of options in securities. And depository system, that was also developed in those times, and digital share ownership and increased investor protection and market integrity also improved with those kind of very fundamental reforms. And also to bring about, guaranteed settlement on stock exchanges. Exchanges were required to set up a clearing house or a clearing corporation. Also, interestingly, I was just checking on Google about Dr. L.C. Gupta, and I came upon one interest, and Ashish probably would know better than me, he had concerns about the prevailing governance structure in those times in the stock exchanges. That time brokers' lobby was dominating the stock exchanges. And so he advised SEBI that SEBI should review the governance structure, the constitution of the board of stock exchanges. And he specifically said, please dispense with the position of president of stock exchanges. President used to be from the broking community. So SEBI followed that advice, and SEBI abolished that position from stock exchanges. And also further reforms on the governance of stock exchanges was brought about. Also, other important reforms, we allowed domestic, private and foreign players into the mutual fund industry. Greater institutionalization of the market happened. Greater play of the foreign portfolio investors. Also, it is, reforms of those times. And also on the enforcement side, SEBI, when he was our member, we brought about this prohibition of fraudulent and unfair trade practices regulations, PFUTP as we call. And also we, asked exchanges to set up dedicated departments for market surveillance. Now let me move to the second piece, pioneer of the derivatives market. He was truly a pioneer of the derivatives market, following the prominent role he played on our board. He was asked to chair this committee of derivatives, and I believe Ashish was also a part of that committee. Oh, you were answering to the committee. Okay, sure. So based on the recommendations of this committee, derivatives were introduced for trading in India in a very phased manner. He said, you start with index products, index-based products. So we started with index futures, and then, index options, then single stock futures, and so on. So a very calibrated approach, and so that has helped develop our derivatives market in a very orderly manner. And today exchanges offer a wide array of derivatives, including commodity derivatives, and India is ranked quite high globally in terms of the derivatives trading volumes. But what is important is his thoughts and ideas. Dr. Gupta's thoughts and ideas were far ahead of his times, and I would like to illustrate that. The recommendations which he made as a chairman of that committee more than 20 years ago, some of those recommendations SEBI has implemented only in the recent years. And I'll just tell you some specific recommendations. So this committee on derivatives, which he chaired in 1998, it had recommended that derivatives should be settled through physical settlement, not cash settlement, where it should lead to delivery on the individual stocks. So committee and Dr. L.C. Gupta were of the view that this would lead to better convergence of the cash market and the derivatives market, and it will curb excessive volatility and speculation. So for whatever reasons, this recommendation for physical settlement was not accepted. I'll not go into that. There could have been some good arguments. But the fact remains, in 2018, for the same very reasons which Dr. L.C. Gupta pointed out, that misalignment between the cash and derivative segment, SEBI introduced the physical settlement on the single stock, individual stocks. So even so that was one point. Another point is, even today, the trading members and the clearing members in the stock exchanges, they compute their net worth in accordance with method of computation prescribed by the committee. In fact, whenever the discussion comes on net worth, in this context, his name is very freely used. The net worth computation as recommended by Dr. L.C. Gupta committee. So, so it is, and it has stood the test of time. So many years that definition has not been changed. And also a risk disclosure document with clients at the time of onboarding of the clients. He said that, there is a need for such a document, and that document today also is signed. So these are some examples, in the interest of time, I'll not go into other details. These ideas still hold good, even 25 years later. So very quickly, some other significant contributions. So, he also said that we should, that was again as a part of this committee, the committee recommendation was, actually it was interesting to read. I did some research while preparing for this, and I read the report given by, the parts of the report. So some things are very prophetic. So he said that we should ultimately move towards a single national clearing corporation for all stock exchanges. This was way back, more than 20 years ago. And he said that, this may be, and he also said, committee noted that this may be difficult to achieve in the immediate future. It should remain as the ultimate goal to be achieved. So, as I said in the beginning, he had this foresight, what has to come at what point of time. And SEBI moved towards this direction with the introduction of interoperability of clearing corporations in 2019, wherein trades can be cleared and settled through any of the clearing corporations and not necessarily restricted to the clearing corporation of the exchange on which the trade is done. Now, let me recall another discussion which I had with Dr. Gupta on one occasion. This was on the appointment of independent directors on the companies, on the board of companies. So that was a fairly recent kind of amendment we had done. This is, I think, somewhere in 15 or 20, in 2000 sometime, I think, in that decade. And so, he was very clear, and he said, look, when you talk of independent directors, what do you mean? They should be independent on the board, right? And he said, in case you want them to be independent, promoters of the company should not have any say in their appointment. You're very candid. And I went back to my seniors and I tried to sort of push that thought in the industry circles. They said, are you crazy? Why will the promoters not have a say? They've invested the money. So that idea was completely pushed back. But if you see in sheer purity of the concept, if somebody who's appointing you, how can you be independent, if he has a control on your appointment? So that was his thought. But nonetheless, I was handling corporate governance